Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I got a book that I'm nostalgically excited for, but actually in reading it still holds up. This is the first volume of the Ultimate Collection of Erik Larsen's Savage Dragon, which was definitely one of my favorite Image comics as a kid. And I just remember it feeling different than all of the other ones, and I've kept up with it. I still read Savage Dragon. But it's really nice to go back and visit this, and it's nice to have hardcover collections of it. And hopefully, this will continue and keep up, and the whole thing will be collected this way eventually because I really like it. It's nice. Got these end papers here that have like the most iconic image and an introduction from Robert Kirkman saying that this is the book that kind of has inspired everything he's done, and that makes a lot of sense, especially going back and reading it. It has the kind of Kirkman vibes to it. And then, yeah, we'll just jump into the story. So this is just me rereading this for the first time since, I don't know, since it came out probably. I remember being on a vacation to my grandmother's house in Anaheim. She lived really close to like Universal Studios. So I remember being at Universal Studios and going into the gift shop or a bookshop there or something, and they had Savage Dragon trade paperbacks, and I believe that's the first time I read it. And I just remember poring over those books and going them over and over again, and then later like quitting buying them because I was I guess in volume 2 we'll get to why I quit buying them for a while. So anyways, just starting out with this like just completely iconic image here. It's like what a hell of a way to start a series. And then I've noticed that in reading this book, it's really cool to see, because Larsen had obviously been working with this character for his entire life. He was able to preload stuff in like this and then come back to these images and these moments over and over again and continue to add power to them. But I just remember, and it still holds up in the reread, being really shocked by the mystery of that image, not knowing who this character was, having amnesia and all that kind of stuff. And then also, I just remember the book feeling different. And now looking back on it, I get why. Like, this was a book that immediately jumped into a bunch of like close-ups on faces, and unlike most of the other Image guys at the time, like Erik Larsen's actually capturing a lot of different expressions. He's a really good cartoonist. So like the despair here in Dragon's eyes when he realizes he doesn't know who he is, and then kind of the softness and and then the surprise here, the anger. There's just a variety of emotions that Larsen is capturing that grounded this book in a sense of reality that I wasn't seeing in anything else that I was reading at the time. It was all Jim Lee's Wildcats and Liefeld's Youngblood, and Spawn had a little bit more nuance to it. Shadowhawk had a little bit more nuance, really poorly written on a reread. So the fact that this one holds up is really cool. Another thing I noticed right out the gate is that Larsen is introducing us to a whole cast of characters really, really quickly, but it doesn't feel like I'm being bombarded. Like, he's a good enough writer that I get to meet Dragon, I get to meet Frank. We kind of get the fact that there's Super Patriot going on in the background. We meet Frank's wife. We meet this nurse who's going to become important later on. So again, the fact that Larsen really has had years and years of experience since he was in grade school working on these characters has allowed him to work them in almost just as seemingly throwaway characters at first, and then able to build up the world around that without me feeling like I'm dumped into a world and overwhelmed with stuff either. And again, just like some of these things here where like the characters are being flirty and he's got that nice like little smile and stuff, that's just kind of a subtlety of character that I wasn't used to in the Image comics at the time. So I get why this book felt really different and special to me. I also remember after that trip in Universal, I think my parents flipped through the book, and I've remembered my mom saying here and there that she always thought that the Savage Dragon one looked more interesting than the rest of them. And I kind of wonder if that's because she was flipping through and seeing that there was like subtlety to what he was doing. It wasn't all just guys with the gritted teeth, this kind of stuff everywhere. I really like too when you really first see Savage Dragon get in a fight, how casual it is. It's like he's not even punching, he's just putting his arm out and then kind of casually tosses him away. There's stuff like that that's fun. It's also fun to go back and see like he has like you some kind of retard or something like that's something that I doubt even Larsen would put in one of his books now. Larsen seems like a pretty politically and socially conscious guy, so it's just fun to watch how those things change over time. What is thought of as acceptable, even for a creator who's going out of his way to have like progressive ideals in his book. You know, a really diverse cast of characters and all that stuff. It's just that wasn't a problematic word at the time. Some more just really casual cast building that I quite like, and I quite like the coloring on these. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But going through and introducing 5 more characters who are all going to be important at different times in the book, but they're also just at the moment you can be seeing them as kind of like throwaway, just giving a sense of the flavor of the place. Also enjoying that this is set in Chicago. I feel like most of the books I was reading were set in New York or something like that, or you just have like Wildcats or something, Youngblood. I don't know. I don't even know where they were at. Also topical, like using the Rodney King thing to talk about. Like I said, like Larsen has pretty, at least liberal. I don't know about progressive, but pretty liberal viewpoints, especially for this time. And like Valentino, he's putting them into the book in a way that's compelling. Unlike Valentino, he's actually a good writer, and so you know you don't cringe going back and reading it as much. But here you have a guy that's obviously racist, and he kind of like quickly addresses the issue of like police violence and the Rodney King beatings and things like that. I think that's another plus of how Larsen writes is he always addresses things pretty quickly. Like he'll mention it on 2 pages and then he'll move on to the next thing. So it's part of the world, but he's not getting caught up in it, 4 pages. He's not like beating you over the head with it. Whereas like in Shadowhawk, that kind of becomes the whole driving story. So it really this feels more like the superhero version of The Wire or Treme or those kind of shows. Nowhere near as well written, but with this big cast of characters that's rotating, and then you kind of tangentially cover all of the related topics as you cycle through the different people. So I really like that. Some really goofy stuff here. I don't know why this detective here is crouching. I do like that there's this red herring that this guy might be Star because he's got the long hair. And then just going through this, it was just so much fun looking back at, like, I just remember looking at this picture over and over and over again and thinking it was so cool. And there's a lot of pictures in here that just have that iconic coolness that makes me want to go draw any of the action scenes, even though I feel like Larsen kind of has stock poses and images that he does. He still knows how to make a really powerful image. And then also just really enjoying that 1990s like pissed off neck. Larsen can do it, but I feel like all the other image creators, this would have been every face that they draw. So the fact that he knows when to back off the crosshatching, the fact when he knows how to have a character smile is a big deal. But then he can also have fun with the like that just makes no sense with all the tendons in the neck. You get scenes like this where you get kind of a proto Brian Michael Bendis writing style, where it's again introducing a bunch of characters, but it's also just through interviews, like a man on a street type of, what does the police force think of Dragon? What is the man on the street? And again, introducing characters. This is Sharona Jackson, who's going to become Rapture pretty soon. So these throwaway characters that he's building something for, or that he has throwaway characters, and then that lets him go back and be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and use that character, turn them into something, and make it seem like a plan all along. But you get a sense that he's planning a little bit more, like I said, because he has been living with these characters so long, it doesn't feel like he's just throwing out random stuff, hoping he can use it later. It feels pretty planned. Also, just like really smart, sensitive storytelling where Dragon's in a car, but he's got this fin on his head, so he has to hunch over so his fin doesn't touch the ceiling. It's that kind of subtlety. I feel like Larsen got a reputation for being the big dumb action guy, and in the reread I'm getting the sense that the big dumb action, he likes drawing it, but it's always like pretty quick and over and then get back to character development. So he's got a really great combination of the kid who's the 10-year-old kid who's been working on Savage Dragon his whole life, and then the adult. And I think Larsen is probably the only guy I can think of that has legitimately worked on the same character his entire life. Like, this is his childhood set of characters, and he's still working on them, like, to this day. over 50 years later. I know Dave Sim had a great run with Cerebus. He got 300 issues, but that was a character he created later. He had other characters, I'm sure, in his youth. I think Larsen's the only guy who really took that body of characters that he made as a kid and has made a successful living, gotten famous off of those characters. And it's really impressive. And he's able to combine that childish glee of just do whatever the hell I want, almost like sophomoric glee, with like some more adult sensitivities in the way he treats the characters. Another thing that I'm enjoying that he's setting up throughout this early run is that all the ladies that Savage Dragon runs into are impressed by him, and he's got different kinds of flirtations with each woman as well, which seems pretty nuanced in the writing. And then just, you know, some more of those iconic images. I just remember thinking these were so cool. This Star character with his hair, I think, is a really awful design, and luckily Larsen takes care of that pretty quickly. But I like that, again, he's got a number of characters, well, Savage Dragon included, where you don't really know who he is. You know, there's a lot of characters who have mystery in their identities, and that unfolds throughout the story. And then the fact that he keeps coming back to this basic fetal character in the middle image that's not even the dragon, but he keeps coming back to this image over and over and like adding juice to it, adding power to it, I think is really smart. Here's another one where Savage Dragon is just making ladies swoon a little bit. This character is going to become a stalker. This arachnid character, I remember this being like maybe the grossest drawing I'd ever seen at the time. This is another image that I would just come back to and like look at over and over and over again, and just the grossness of all these dead, chewed up kids. I remember that being really impactful at the time. Here's Super Patriot gets introduced, a bigger cast of characters. I forget, someone in the comments, can you tell me, did Larsen create Super Patriot, or was that Liefeld? I think Larsen created it, and then Liefeld was kind of allowed to use it. I forget. There seemed like some back and forth. He also mentions, well, we'll skip up to that in a second. Here's that fetal position image again. Now Dragon's dead. Really haunting, unsettling, like almost mechanical body horror here, with Super Patriot getting up and walking off on his own. And then you find out, and this is another thing I always liked about Savage Dragon, you find out that Cyber Data, which was Mark Silvestri's bad guys in Cyberforce, were involved in making Super Patriot the cyborg that he is now versus just the straight up superhero that he was earlier on. And I think Savage Dragon and Larsen, more than anyone else, really had that spirit of Image being a full universe that everyone existed in. And I always found that really exciting at the time. Like I was 11, 12 when Image came out. I mean, the perfect age for it. And so that was like the coolest thing in the world, is I could dip into a superhero universe that didn't have all, this decades of back history like Marvel and DC did. This was a universe I got to see grow before my eyes. And I think Larsen, being that kind of childish, collaborate with your friends, kind of make your own books at grade school guy, he took that to the extreme, pun I guess intended here, with Bedrock. I thought this guy's name was Badrock. Did that get changed over time? I thought it was Badrock, but here they're calling him Bedrock. But he took that, like that it was one big box of toys that everyone could play with, and he really ran with it more than the other creators did. But even those other creators had those crossovers, and I always enjoyed that about the early Image stuff, that there was the studios with their properties, but there was a shared world, and that Larsen delved into that and played with that as fun. And he also kind of takes shots, like throughout this, he has Savage Dragon talking crap to Bedrock about, you dummies wearing your costumes. And so you kind of see Larsen knowing that what he's doing is a little bit more sophisticated than what the other Image creators are doing, and he's poking fun at it. And then he knows that, like, Spawn is kind of something interesting and different as well. So he has Spawn here not in his costume, but he's walking around in a trench coat. And the characters here, these are Rob and Erik, are these two kids, and they got all excited. Oh man, it's him! Oh, check it out! Oh, it's so cool! And then they run over there and they're looking at Savage Dragon on the TV. Ah, oh, it's so cool! Watch out, Mister! And then Spawn says, "Oh, glory seeker, I do my best to avoid attention. I'll have none of it." So he's a poking fun at Spawn, knowing that Spawn's like the biggest property, but then saying, "Well, these kids still like Savage Dragon more." And then Spawn's like, yeah, whatever. I don't need it. I'm the best. I'm the best character here. So he's both poking fun at himself and at others, which is cool. Again, he has a lot of red herrings, which makes it fun. So I remember being really caught up in this storyline, thinking, oh, I'm finally gonna know who Savage Dragon is. He's like this punk rock guy. This old lady thinks it's her son Rodney. That was a really compelling story, even though it was a red herring and doesn't go anywhere. That's not who Savage Dragon was. And again, Larsen just kind of talking shit. Badrock here is like, hey, I wanted to, like, we're just fighting because I wanted to see if you're tough enough to join Youngblood. And Dragon knocks him out and then yells at him. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. So taking pot shots at the typical kind of superhero crossover, even though Larsen does that a number of times, even in this book. And then Bedrock says, it happens in Marvel comics all the time. And he's like, you out of your mind, you idiot. And so he's kind of like deconstructing the superhero genre a little bit, even though his reputation is really as the most stupid superhero engaged of those creators, partially because of his character designs are so wacky, because he just lets himself have fun with it. And then some really good, like, emotional drama. I think in that Kirkman intro, Kirkman is talking about how much Larsen has influenced everything that he's done. And I'm realizing going back, I know in the newer stuff, like, I still think Larsen's a good writer, but I didn't realize how good he was back then, where he was really good at having these peaks and valleys of different cliffhangers. And they weren't always like action cliffhangers, it's not always like, how's he going to get out of this trap or something. A lot of them are emotional, like finding out that Frank was part of the reason that his own brother died, and things get left on those kind of emotional cliffhanger notes as well. And that has a really great rhythm throughout the book where Larsen knows how to keep you engaged. And then personal stuff, like Savage Dragon sleeping with the young girl next door. And that was something that wasn't happening in any of the other comics. I remember being pretty freaked out as a young kid that my parents were going to see like this drawing with the side boob here and get mad at me. But to see a superhero just kind of being flirty and shaving, things like that were just very different for me at the time. And having full pages devoted to them flirting in the bedroom and kind of smacking her butt and all of those things. As an adult, I really appreciate that. As a kid, I was just scared I was going to get in trouble, but it lent itself to that thing where it felt like something new. And then even again, an emotional cliffhanger here where this girl that he's flirting with gets shot by her ex-boyfriend. That's just all, like, I think really, really good stuff. It holds up. And then the doom and gloom of the funeral and setting him up for having this goatee that he wears for a while. I just think it's all real good. And then he'll go for like 1 or 2 pages into, okay, I need an action sequence. And I know John Byrne at the time was talking shit on Image, and so here you have Larsen just really taking shots at Byrne's Nixed men and all their stupid powers. You have a character that's super powerful, can regenerate, all of this kind of stuff, but he has an emotional vulnerability, and people talk about not being able to write Superman in the right way. Well, you kill Lois Lane and all of a sudden Superman becomes interesting. Like Savage Dragon is facing real life consequences. I know later on there's like multiverse stuff and characters get brought back who have died, but there really was a sense of real world stakes for a long time in the book. Really, and I remember enjoying this sequence and rereading it. I got quite a kick out of it again, where this guy's saying like, "Oh, dragons don't breathe. You don't breathe fire. How are you a dragon?" And he blows alcohol at him. So just some of that really cool, badass stuff. Like in here, you definitely are getting like some Sin City Frank Miller vibes. Larsen is always willing to experiment and play and try new things and pick up influences from other creators. So that's always fun to watch, and it keeps it fresh, even though he has a consistent style. Like looking back at this, his art's pretty much it's changed a little bit, but there's a lot of just maybe it's a little bit cleaner in some spots, but there's a lot of Larsenisms that have still stuck around, and I think that's impressive as well. And then I really enjoy this when we come back and we're now in the ongoing Savage Dragon series. We're not in the mini series anymore. Larsen does a really smart job of building up a spinoff. So he starts introducing all of these other characters, mostly from his childhood, some that he's made up new. He explains that in the back matter here. But here you get Ricochet and Barbaric, and they're looking to expand the team. Here you get this issue is kind of a throwaway for me, but you get a crossover with the Ninja Turtles, which makes sense. They were huge at the time. Everyone's green and everyone's bald. But I did really, again, get a kick out of him taking pot shots. So Savage Dragon had recently guest starred in Shadowhawk, which Sean and I looked at when we did our Shadowhawk reread. And here he's back in New York again, chasing down this gargoyle thing. But he refers to Shadowhawk as, first it was that insane vigilante chiropractor, and before you know it, I'm out here every other month. And I just like that he's kind of, again, taking shots at one of the other creators, even though they're collaborating. It's like you can see that it's a playful competition for Larsen throughout this. And then he starts introducing more of the Freak Force characters. You get Dart brought on. You have Star now without his stupid hair. And you're starting to get the sense throughout the book that he's actually not that William Johnson cop guy, but he's a Peter Frampton knockoff pop rock star that's also this character, and that shows up later in the book. And then you get the return of Mighty Man, who had supposedly died. And then here again you get a whole bunch more cast of characters introduced, and this seemingly tangential character here, the nurse, who, if you read on, you know is going to become Mighty Man. You know actually is already Mighty Man, has had the powers. Here there's some really cool foreshadowing where Savage Dragon is just kind of casually talking to her, says, "Miss, you just said the magic word." And since she's kind of a Shazam-like character, that's like a funny little Easter egg hint that he knows who that character is going to be already. And then here you have another kind of female, like 3 females entering Dragon's life. The Freak is an interesting character that will come back in the next volume. Then we get introduced to Horridus. I remember being really kind of freaked out about the scenes leading up to them finding her with like these dead bodies rotting in the kitchen and whatnot. That was really intense for me as a young kid reading these books, and then seeing her chained down in the basement and all of that. I remember that being impactful. And then also just like kind of how fun and cute she is, where she's like the finger licking good, like she's a really sympathetic character. You get a girl that Dragon saved that has the hots for him, the one that swooned into his arms. She's coming back and stalking him, getting a little crazy. So you're looking at Larsen as like this actually really good, like, writer who can cycle so many different plots against each other, building towards other things that he knows he's headed towards. And it just feels like really, really good TV soap opera writing with this stupid kind of superhero component to it. Like you have, this childish thing where you have a character who's basically like a big zit waiting to pop, and when he explodes, he gets skinny again, and they can get him. But dealing again with police brutality, Dart's throwing these darts and she shouldn't be doing it, and these kind of things. Then you get introduced to a really important character throughout the entire series, Rapture here, who's going to be Dragon's first baby mama, basically, of his son Malcolm, who's the Savage Dragon now, the main character in the title now. So you get an introduction to her. I definitely remember being a little bit like, ooh, that's a little too va-va-voom, I might get in trouble. And I think in the next volume will be some of the issues where I really felt like I was going to get in trouble, and I quit buying the book because I was scared of my parents. Here, the cesspool character is referred to, his real name is Pete Davidson. I thought that was pretty funny because Larsen couldn't have known that eventually there was going to be a public figure named Pete Davidson, and that the name Cesspool would be a pretty good Pete Davidson character. So that was fun. And then here's more of just that stupid childish fun that I think people associate with Savage Dragon and Erik Larsen, and kind of unduly write the book off because of stuff like this. You have this character Dung that just like has big cybernetic poop guns for arms and is shooting poop all over the place. But really, when you read it, Larsen's able to vacillate between that kind of stuff and this kind of stuff much better than I think he gets credit for. So here he spent all this time building up all these characters, building this team on the police force, and then the characters are like, we're not going to wear police uniforms, we're not going to quit throwing darts, we're not going to do all this stuff. So they leave, and what's been building up in the story as Savage Dragon having helpers is now like a spinoff on another book. And I thought, he's like really patient and planned that out and introduced them pretty slowly, and then like led to the spinoff book, and that's fun. It's too bad that book didn't last longer. He laments that here in some of his notes. But I have noticed that when Larsen writes anything other than Savage Dragon, even a lot of the backup stories, I just don't think he's as good of a writer. And I remember thinking that with the spinoff books he did as well, that they were just the dumb superhero stuff, and they kind of lost I don't know, I'd have to go back and read them, but that was my impression, is that they lost the humanity that was in a lot of the Savage Dragon stuff. There was just something different when he wrote for other people. And then we get into what was the coolest thing at the time, which was this issue that was all splash pages, a story told in splash pages. And I think every one of these images is just burned into my mind. The fact that like Frank gets killed off, that was something that I wasn't used to in the books I was reading at the time, that characters were expendable. I think Kirkman took that into The Walking Dead, and that was really part of the success of that, is like the idea that anyone could die at any time. And this really felt like that. And then as the issue continues, you get more of that. You get this character here. Cyberface gets killed because he was going to flip on Overlord, this big mean character. Another person whose secret identity was kind of a mystery. This character supposedly knew who he was. So there's just all of these kind of mysteries to solve. While reading this, I really got the impression that, especially this image right here in this scene where he's in this big tower kind of fighting the bad guy and toughing it out, I really got the sense that there was a good amount of Bruce Willis in the DNA of the Savage Dragon, that he was like the everyman type of hero in the movies at the time. And even though Dragon doesn't look like an everyman, he's huge, he kind of still has that Bruce Willis everyman vibe. He's just in a trench coat, he's not in superhero costume or anything like that, and he's pretty committed to the down to earth approach. And so that felt really interesting and fun to me. And then just the willingness to abuse the character before you learn that he had regenerative powers, which, as someone who's been reading the series for a while will know that. But at the time, you didn't know that. And so seeing Dragon have his hand blown off, seeing him getting basically his whole chest blown out, thrown out a window here, and then landing on this spike, that series of images was just so intense and shocking. I remember that, and it still holds up. Like, Larsen is just so good with these compositions. And then this piece of writing here is pretty silly but also badass. In your next life, when somebody suggests you leave or face their wrath, leave. It's the good tough guy thing. And then, coming into the next issue, like, oh my god, is Dragon dead? What are we gonna do here? And this opening sequence of like the snow, this kind of Frank Miller Sin City vibe here. This almost feels like Jim Lee to me. It's almost a little too clean for Larsen. And then him pulling himself off of this spike here and falling into the snow, again, has that just real badass, like Bruce Willis crawling through glass kind of just tough guy thing. Again, this image, he's got no hand, he's got a hole in his chest still healing. He's fighting these two goofy looking bad guys, and they slice his face to death. And this is, again, just such an iconic, cool image. And then here you have Rapture finding him. And so that's as far as this book goes with the actual story. And then you have this huge chunk of back matter here, which is really, really cool and actually really informative. So you have all of the covers that he's done, pin-ups, and then variant covers. So for like the trade paperbacks, I'm pretty sure this was the cover that I had on the trade paperback that I picked up when I was at Universal Studio. That was another one of these iconic images I just remember kind of obsessing over, and I'm pretty sure that was on the cover of the book I have. And then you have, for other collected volumes. I didn't know it, but in reading the frontispiece by Kirkman. This is the first time this stuff has been collected in color in 20 years, which is really surprising to me that this haven't been constantly in print, or that they were in print but in black and white is very strange to me. And then you get a lot of the early stuff from Larsen, and he talks about the fire that he lost all his artwork into, which I think people are pretty familiar with that story. But especially for him being the one guy who has been working on this character ever since he was a kid and just had all of that stuff saved, I can't imagine how devastating that would be. And it sounds like, I didn't realize, but that happened right before Image happened. So he was like ferociously trying to sketch at that point in the early 90s, trying to capture by memory all of these characters that he had built up over his life. And it's fun to see the couple drawings that he does have from early on, but it's a real bummer not to be able to see more of that. And then he has some of his stuff from the 80s where he was just kind of breaking in as a professional, and you can see some of that early art. But it's a real bummer to not be able to see, and I can't even imagine for Larsen what a loss it is to not have this kind of stuff anymore for the characters, especially, like I said, given that he's the one guy who's managed to take his childhood world that he built and never deviate from it. It's a real bummer that he lost that, but also cool to see all his sketches, and also see. I had no idea. Larsen's work has always struck me as someone who just goes for it, and to see how much planning he does is actually really shocking. And to see that, the types of changes that he makes on the fly is really interesting. But there's a section we'll get to in a second with his thumbnails that are actually really, really stunning, how much work he does. Here's just some more sketchbook stuff, trying to figure the character out. You can see him getting familiar with the fin as well. I've always felt like Savage Dragon, like Cerebus, is one of these characters that no one else can really draw right. Like, if it's not Dave Sim drawing Cerebus, it just doesn't quite look right to me. And Savage Dragon is the same way, where that fin on his head, like, I don't feel like anyone else can pull it off from every angle in the way that Larsen can. Whereas, like, Hellboy, I've seen a bunch of artists apply their style to that, and it's fine, it works. But I really feel like no one can really draw a Savage Dragon but Larsen. Like, no one can handle that fin. Some original art here that hasn't been adjusted, so that's really cool to get a sense of like how he's working. Obviously, I always like original art. So I know he's someone who experiments with materials as well. So it'd be interesting to see a lot more of this to get a sense of where's he using brush, where's he using markers, where's he using the nib pens. I think he cycles through a lot of those kinds of things depending on his mood. Here's some more pages that got taken out, abandoned images. Here he's got this gal who's obviously got an abusive mom, and he self-edited it, not for the image, although I don't think this is his best drawing of Dragon's face either, but he's saying that the writing on this is no good. So it says, look at you, Debbie, nervous, scared, overwhelmed. Why don't you just cut the crap and ask me to sleep with you? So you can see why he cut that out a little too far. And then this is where I got really interested in this back matter. I had no idea that Erik Larsen spent so much time on thumbnails. I thought he was someone who just grabbed a page and did a drawing like this and then got his markers out and went to town with the inking. And to see that, like, on this page here, he's doing 3 different layouts is really, really interesting to me. And that's, I guess, how you get some of that, like, super iconic imagery. I just assumed that these were easy for him. There's always kind of the same poses that he does over and over again. I also, like I said, we'll come back to this later. I said that earlier in the book. These are the last pages where Larsen provided his own color guides to the Ollie Optics for them to turn into digital. And he's kind of saying, that he feels like these are really bad colors, and he's sorry that he inflicted this upon the public, and he was better off with a real colorist. But I actually really like these strange colors, his use of the whites and things like that, the less saturated greens, the overall kind of emotional coolness of everything. it adds quite a bit to the down-to-earthness of the book. I feel like these more saturated images and colors that I'm used to in the book, this seems to be probably like what's going on in Larsen's head about the book, and I would like to see the book colored this way. Actually, honestly, I think it kind of fits the vibe. But whatever. He's obviously, even though that's what he would do, he's decided he didn't like it, and he has other people doing other things. So the book must be the way that he wants it. He also shows at some point in here that he was playing with like these really awful reds. Well, what he thought was awful, but I thought was kind of interesting. Reds in his coloring. Oh, here we go. It should be in the coloring. These really intense reds. But again, I kind of like the strangeness of it. It adds something more unique and personal to it. But really, I quite like his muted color palettes there. This is also interesting. This is when he's doing thumbnails for other artists. So there's a collection of some of the backstories that he would run. This is really cool here because you get to see the thumbnails that he did for Adam Hughes. So that's fun to see how he's communicating to the other artists, and then you can compare them to the stories in the back of the book. And then here you get this one cover. This has the 16, 20, 24, at least 24 sketches for the cover of Savage Dragon Punching Badrock. And when you look at them, they're pretty much the same drawing over and over with just minor variations. And yeah, like that's where I'm saying, like, the fact that he's doing all of these really, really surprised me. I would have thought that he was just a get a pen and go guy. This character, Cat Kill, here, which I think is one of the two Deadly Duo characters. His name is Alan Williamson, so obviously a shout out to Al Williamson. Yeah, he's one of the two Deadly Duo characters. I either didn't know who Al Williamson was, or I just don't remember that character being named like that. So that's really cool to see there that he's shouting out to some of his people. And then here you collect the series of backstories that were intended to help introduce the Freak Force characters as the series was going on, and also fill in some of the story gaps. So I think these are some of the better written, like, little backup stories that I remember from Larsen. Maybe my memory of his backup stories is just unkind. I just don't remember them being kind of inconsequential, but these ones are all pretty important. So here you have Rob Haynes working over Larsen's layouts, and you get the story of how Starr lost his hair. So he obviously decided that was a really bad look and came up with a story to get rid of it. Here you have a Mighty Man story, and this is really fun. This is drawn by Victor Bridges over top of Larsen's layouts, but it's really fun because, as far as I know, the audience does not understand yet that Mighty Man is the nurse character. You just have this character, Phyllis, talking to Sam, who is her roommate, and with an androgynous name like that, the assumption is, I think, just supposed to be that it's like a male character who's turning into Mighty Man, and then Phyllis is kind of like, hey, why don't we try out that sexy new body of yours? And the intensity of the argument makes a lot more sense once you know that this is her female roommate, who's probably straight, but is changing into a male body, and so it's like pretty uncomfortable with the suggestion there. And that's kind of fun, and it's a story that works even when you don't know who the character is, and it kind of has tension there where you realizing this is someone who's testing out their powers for the first time, but you don't know who it is yet. That works, and then it works even better in retrospect. And then you get some earlier Adam Hughes art. It's interesting because between the four backup stories here, there's a fair amount of consistency between the artists, this like softer approach that they have. This is a little bit more angular, but I was thinking this looks like early Adam Hughes, but I wasn't quite sure if it was just one of these other artists, but it is indeed Adam Hughes. So that's really fun to see some early Adam Hughes stuff. I think this page here is where it was really like pretty undeniable to me that was Adam Hughes, but this introduces Rapture, who again is going to become a very important character. And then we go back to a David Williams finished piece again about Mighty Man getting into her first fight with the new kind of host body changing into Mighty Man. And again, this character Phyllis, the roommate Phyllis, hanging out with Sam. And again, the audience still wouldn't know who is changing into Mighty Man yet. So that was really fun. And then you get the covers here. You get your Adam Hughes cover, the Mighty Man cover, and yeah, it's a really, this is exactly like what I would hope for. This is exactly the way I want to own Savage Dragon. Nice hardcover, tons of backups, collecting all those important little backstories. It just feels like this is, you know, they're calling it the Ultimate Collection. And this does feel like the Ultimate Savage Dragon collection to me. And I really, really, really hope that this continues to be, I've already got number 2 pre-ordered, and I hope it continues to be successful enough that eventually it catches up with the actual series and follows it until Larsen's done with the series, so I can have a whole collection of these. Really, really enjoyed it. Really surprised. Think Larsen deserves a reevaluation for his writing skills. I think this is a much more sophisticated book in all of its stupidity than people gave it credit for. So really enjoyed it, really glad to have this, and really looking forward to the second volume, which should be coming soon. So I'll dip into that, and I'm sure we'll do a video for that as well. So if you haven't got it and you're a fan of Savage Dragon, highly recommend it. If you've never read Savage Dragon before, you really are missing out. You know, if you can stomach superhero comics at all, then this is one of the best ones you could be reading. And reading this, I think the other superhero comic I put on par with this is Kirkman's Invincible, and I can definitely see how this book led to what became Invincible. And it's just the most fun I've had reading something in a while. And again, just super impressed that Larsen has managed to pull off. He's the one like 10-year-old in the world who's managed to pull off his dream and still be drawing his own characters 50 years later. So props to Larsen for that. That's an impressive feat of commitment. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you would like to see more videos like this, you want to support us, there's 2 ways to support us. The first is on our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of engagement there so that you can pledge support to. The first one just gets you early access to our videos. The second one gets you exclusive access to an ongoing webcomic experiment we're doing. You can help, you can vote and help determine where the story goes. Also, in that tier, you get exclusive previews of the books that Sean and I are working on, our private artwork and things like that. Any of the money that we get from that just goes back into buying the books that we review. So we just try and turn that back into the community and keep you in a stream of things to consider purchasing. If you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. Centralia is an awesome, gorgeous comic by rising Dutch star Miel van de Peet. This is his first work. It's a really great sci-fi story. There's a world in the future where the sun has gotten so hot that people can't be on the ground, so they have to run around. There's a lot of conceits that go with that. You know, what is the world that looks like? And I think you can see by the art that Sean's description of this book as like a Moebius for young adults, a YA Moebius, is a really great description of this really gorgeous and like wild, wacky, fun book. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.